Selene had known about the treaty for 3 weeks. She had known about the wedding for 3 days. She had known the man she was marrying for exactly 0 minutes before she stood across from him at the altar. Her father called it an honor. Her mother, before she passed, would have called it something else, something Selene didn't let herself think about too long, because thinking about her mother on a day like this only made her chest hurt in a way she couldn't afford right now. The carriage ride to the northern Pack lands had taken 6 hours. Selene spent every one of them staring out the small window, watching pine trees blur into more pine trees, rehearsing a version of calm she did not feel. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Her spine stayed straight. If she was going to walk into a war she hadn't chosen, she decided, she would at least walk into it looking like she wasn't afraid. She was afraid. 2 packs had been at war over grazing lands and border disputes for almost a decade. Wolves had died on both sides. Villages had burned. And now, because 2 old men in fine coats had decided that blood ties healed faster than diplomacy, Selene was the answer. She was the treaty. Her name was written on the 4th line of a document she had read exactly once, in a room full of men who didn't ask her opinion because nobody thought to. She had never met King Draven, not once. Their entire courtship, if it could be called that, had happened through his beta, a quiet, tired-eyed wolf named Corin, who delivered messages back and forth like a man carrying something heavy he didn't want to hold. He agrees to the terms, Corin had told her father, 3 weeks ago, in the sitting room where Selene had been listening from just outside the door. The wedding will happen at the new moon. Nobody had asked if Selene agreed to the terms. She wasn't sure her opinion had ever been part of the terms. So when the carriage finally slowed outside the Northern Pack's stone hall, and she stepped down onto unfamiliar ground, in an unfamiliar dress, about to marry an unfamiliar man, she told herself the only thing she had left to hold on to. Survive today, figure out the rest tomorrow. The hall was already full when she walked in. Wolves from both packs stood shoulder to shoulder, an uneasy peace made physical, watching her with the kind of attention that made her want to disappear into the stone floor. She kept her chin up. She had decided that much in the carriage. Chin up, whatever happened. And then she saw him. King Draven stood at the front of the hall, near the altar, thrice, dressed in dark formal clothes that did nothing to make him look smaller. He was enormous, not just tall, broad in a way that made the men around him look like they belonged to a different species entirely. His hair was dark, cut short, and his jaw was set in an expression Selene couldn't quite read. Not anger, not boredom either, something more complicated. Something he seemed to be working hard to keep off his face. She had expected many things from the Alpha King. Cruelty, maybe. Indifference, certainly. She had not expected the strange, careful way he was watching her walk toward him, like he was trying to solve something. The priestess began the ceremony the moment Selene reached the altar. Old words, older than either of their packs, about loyalty and unity, and the joining of blood. Selene barely heard them. She was watching Draven's hands, wondering if they would be gentle or not, wondering what kind of man she had just been handed to. When the priestess asked if she came to this marriage willingly, the whole hall seemed to lean in. Willingly. What a strange word to use on someone who had been signed away like property in a border agreement. Yes, Selene said, because the only alternative was watching 2 packs return to war over her refusal, and she wasn't willing to carry that weight for the rest of her life either. Draven's hand found hers for the ceremonial binding. His grip was careful, more careful than she expected from someone his size. His thumb moved once against her knuckles, small, almost unconscious, like a question nobody had told him to ask. She looked up at him. He looked away first. That surprised her more than anything else that had happened all day. The vows continued in that old formal language, weaving through promises of protection and pack, and future children Selene wasn't ready to think about. Her stomach turned uncomfortably at that part, and she pushed the feeling down, filing it away for a version of herself that would have to deal with it later. Then came the part of the ceremony nobody had warned her about. The priestess called for the exchange of gifts, an old Northern Pack tradition that predated the treaty, predated the war, predated anything Selene had studied in preparation for this day. Draven reached into his coat and produced a ceremonial blade, its handle etched with careful silver detail, clearly something passed down through generations of his family. Selene had nothing. Nobody had told her there would be a gift exchange. Nobody had told her much of anything, she was realizing, standing there in front of 200 wolves with empty hands and a rising sense of panic she refused to let show on her face. The silence stretched. She could feel every eye in the hall on her, could feel the uneasy peace between the two packs wobbling under the weight of an insult nobody meant to happen. She thought fast. It was the only thing she had left to do. Her fingers found the small pendant at her throat, the one she had put on that morning without thinking, the one that had belonged to her mother. She unclipped it and held it out, pressing it gently into Draven's enormous palm. "It isn't much," she said, quiet enough that only the closest rows could hear. "But it's mine to give. Everything else here was given for me, not by me." The hall went still in a different way now. Draven looked down at the pendant sitting in his palm, like it weighed far more than the small silver chain it was attached to. Something shifted in his expression, something Selene couldn't name yet, but recognized as real, unlike the careful mask he had been wearing since she walked in. "This was your mother's," he said. It wasn't a question. Selene blinked. "How did you know that?" "The craftsmanship. It's old Southern pack work. Nobody makes pendants like this anymore." He turned it over once in his palm, careful, like he was handling something fragile. "You didn't have to give me this. I didn't have anything else that was actually mine." He looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since she had arrived, Selene felt like he was actually seeing her, not the treaty, not the peace agreement wearing a wedding dress, but her. The priestess, sensing the moment had gone somewhere she hadn't planned for, cleared her throat gently and moved the ceremony forward. Draven slid the pendant into his coat pocket, close to his chest, and finished the remaining vows with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. When the ceremony ended and the hall erupted into the noise of celebration, music, toasts, the low howl of wolves marking a moment of peace, Selene found herself seated beside her husband of less than an hour, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 60 minutes of her life. Draven leaned toward her at one point, close enough that she caught the scent of cedar and something colder underneath it, something like winter air. "I didn't want this marriage," he said quietly, meant only for her. Selene kept her eyes forward. "I know, neither did I. I want it now." She turned to look at him properly for the first time since the altar. He wasn't watching her like a political arrangement anymore. He was watching her like someone recalculating everything he thought this day would cost him. "You don't know me," she said, and it came out smaller than she meant it to. "No," he agreed, "but I watched you stand in front of 200 strangers with nothing in your hands and give away the one thing that actually mattered to you, rather than let this alliance fall apart in front of everyone. Nobody's chosen this pack, or this peace, in 20 years. You did, in less time than it took the priestess to finish a sentence." Selene didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing at all. The celebration continued around them, toasts from both packs, careful and hopeful, the kind of speeches that tried to bury a decade of war under one afternoon of forced goodwill. Children ran between tables. Someone's laughter rose above the music near the far end of the hall. It should have felt like any other celebration. It didn't. Not to Selene, sitting beside a man 3 times her size who had just told her, in the middle of his own wedding, that he was starting to want something he hadn't asked for. Later that evening, when the formal part of the reception had quieted and guests had drifted into smaller conversations near the fire pits outside, Draven found her standing alone near the edge of the hall, looking out at the unfamiliar mountains that were apparently her home now. "You're not eating," he observed, coming to stand beside her, not too close, careful with the space between them in a way she was starting to notice was deliberate. "I'm not used to being watched by 200 people while I do it. They'll stop watching eventually, once they're convinced neither of us is going to run." Selene glanced at him. "Are you convinced?" Draven was quiet for a moment, considering the question with more seriousness than she expected. "I wasn't, this morning. I spent most of the day assuming I'd be married to a stranger who resented every part of this arrangement, and honestly, I couldn't have blamed her for it. And now? Now I'm standing next to someone who gave away her mother's pendant in front of my entire pack because she didn't want to embarrass either of us. That's not resentment. That's something else. Selene felt her chin lift slightly. An old habit, protecting whatever softness might show through. Don't mistake practicality for affection. I'm not. He turned to face her fully. I know the difference. I've spent 10 years watching men make decisions out of practicality. What you did back there wasn't practical. It cost you something. I saw it cost you something. She didn't answer right away. The truth was, giving away her mother's pendant had cost her more than she wanted to admit, to a man she'd known for less than a day, but there was something in the way he said it, direct and unflinching, that made her want to be honest with him anyway. It was the only thing I had left of her, Selene said quietly. I wasn't going to let this day take it from me too. Better I choose to give it than have it taken. Draven nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what she meant, and maybe he did. Later, she would learn that he had lost his own mother young, in the early years of the war, and that loss lived in him the same quiet way hers lived in her. Present, unspoken, shaping decisions neither of them fully explained out loud. For now, standing at the edge of a celebration neither of them had asked for, they didn't talk about any of that. They simply stood together, watching the fires burn low against the mountain dark. Two strangers who had been forced into the same life and were only just beginning to realize it might not be the sentence they had both expected. For what it's worth, Draven said eventually, I meant what I said earlier. About wanting this now. Selene looked at him, at the careful, steady way he was watching her, waiting for nothing in particular, just present. Ask me again in a year, she said. If you still mean it then, I'll believe you. A small, genuine smile crossed his face, the first one she had seen all day. Fair enough. Somewhere behind them, the music picked back up, and the two packs who had spent a decade at war continued their careful, hopeful celebration of the peace that had been bought with a wedding neither of them had chosen. But as the night wore on, and Draven's hand found hers again under the cover of the long table, holding on without asking permission this time, Selene allowed herself, just for a moment, to wonder if maybe this arrangement wasn't the ending of anything. Maybe it was simply where her real story was only beginning.